Welcome to Jerry's poetry reading. Heart, who goes there? Well, today I am at Jerry's. This is his place. So, Jerry, come on in.
Hi.
uh, Welcome, everybody. And thank you for welcoming me and allowing me to start the broadcast for you.
I think a few people would have recognized the background and said, that's not Fernando's caravan or RV. This is somewhere different.
All right. So, Jerry, today's topic is going to be what's taking place with COVID in China, right?
Yeah.
So, the first thing that I would like people to understand, and we can just bounce off, is the actual timeline of things and how they took place.
Yeah.
Right. So, we had the big 20 that took place. What happened before? What happened after? And where are we right now?
Okay, well, everybody was hoping for massive announcements when the Big 20 came. There's going to be big changes, and it didn't happen. So it was kind of a bit of a letdown. But what did happen was very shortly afterwards in the timeline, these 20 steps came out. It was 4 different categories: people who are coming into China, people who are already in China and traveling around China, the therapeutics and the treatments. So 4 different steps, and how they were going to manage and ease the restrictions. But then at the same time, a massive wave of Omicron swept through the country. And I think 16 or 20 different cities all experienced. Now, I do a lot of editing inside of Guangdong, and Guangdong newspapers were reporting 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 new cases a day, and it peaked at 9,000 cases a day. So what was happening was, even though we were going through a period of easing the restrictions, there was a necessity to start reimposing restrictions because everybody was a little afraid of Omicron and how bad the long COVID and those kinds of things might become. What has since happened is that in Guangzhou, for example, more than 150,000 cases of confirmed Omicron, 150,000 plus cases. More than 105,000 of them have now left care, left treatment, and are completely free to re-enter society. So far, no one has died. And so far, there has been 1 person who went into severe care, and 2 people who went into serious care. So no critical, no one has died. And I think they're using this kind of science to say, well, now we have the therapeutics, now we have the vaccination in bulk, now we know that whether or not Omicron proves to be more dangerous or less dangerous, we still don't know that. Although people are saying it's less dangerous, it is much more virulent, more people are catching it. So what they're saying is, even though more people are catching it, there are now less people getting critically ill, seriously ill, and dying from it. So at the same time as America had 3,000 people in a week die, China had no one. But 1 city alone had 150,000 new cases. So they're probably saying, well, we've got the vaccines working well. We've got the therapeutics working well. And we're not as worried about Omicron as we used to be. So they have now introduced 10 further steps. And you and I have just been outside. We just went for a walk through the park and did a little bit of video filming in our local park. We put masks on to go out, which most people are doing. And we found there was 1 restriction. They took our temperature as we entered the park, but we didn't have to scan a code or anything. So a lady took our temperatures. We walked into the park, no scanning of the codes, completely eased, restriction-free effectively. So we just had a little walk through the park, 10 or 15 minutes, doing a bit of filming, and then came home again to do this.
Where do you place the justified protests along this timeline? Because we have the Big 20, we have the 20 guidelines, and then we had some justified protests on some of the implementations that were taking place. And now we have the 10. That's basically how things took place. And what Western media likes to tell you is that the government changed COVID protocols because of the protests. I don't see it like that. And the fact is, you can go and check when the 20 were actually implemented. That was before the justified protests. And these 10 are further easing off the restrictions based on listening to the requirements of people, listening to the clamor of people saying, like, look, it's been 3 years. This is really tough. We need to revise this. And the government listen, and they go ahead and provide 10 new guidelines. Any objections to my
No,
angle to this?
I think the thing is, we will never know whether those 10 new guidelines were implemented because of the protests or were coming anyway. We will never know that. The chances are they were implemented because of the protests. The government, despite Western media's claims, the government in China is very responsive to the people. The people said, we want this changed. They got it changed. Now, what's happening now is really quite amazing. I do agree with your timeline. There's no problem with that. Is whether or not they were going to do that, or whether they were going to wait until this current wave, because they got up to, in Guangzhou, they got up to 9,000, and they're now down to 2,000 a day. Still in Guangzhou, 2,000 new cases a day in Guangzhou. So they've got to have some form of restriction, or do they just let it rip? Well, I don't think they ever will.
Let me understand this. So the government says restrictions are minimized, right? People can go out, people can go and do whatever they want, but number of cases go down. What does that tell us? People are taking care and the precautions on their own. Is their own responsibility. Like, I don't remember the last time I see more people masking, more people.
Yeah, more people are masking now than there were last week.
Exactly. Yeah. Because, well, there's a certain fear that with the restrictions being lowered, the virus is actually going to spread faster and affect more people. So people are more cautious. So this is a thing about the Chinese mentality that's a little bit different. They understand, well, now we need to take responsibility for our health and caring for our family and our elders and whatnot. Elders are being guided into the procedures to take the vaccine and take responsibility for their own care as well. So it's interesting to see from 9,000 cases to 2,000 cases, even though restrictions are low. That to me is a shocker. I mean, for a lot of people will be like scratching their heads, but to me is just Chinese people understand that they need to be responsible, and they're not politicizing or divided into, oh, wearing a mask is this or no, they just do it because they know it works. As your dentist.
No one has said to me you shouldn't be wearing a mask. No one. I've had foreigners who said masks don't work. Not a single Chinese person has ever said that. And what's really interesting is, and I could show this, I get text messages on WeChat all the time from Chinese friends saying, hey, Jerry, the restrictions are eased, but please take care, because they know I travel a lot. I like to travel with my wife, and I travel all the time. And they said, please take care, because even though the restrictions are eased, COVID is still here. So there are far more people concerned about the potential of catching COVID now than were before. We didn't have the problem when we had the restrictions. They knew the government was looking after them, and now they need to look after themselves.
So there's an interesting mix of reactions. So people really wanted the government to ease restrictions so that business and the economy and life could go back to a certain degree of normalcy. However, they're more than happy, more than appreciative of the need to take care of their health by themselves. So we're seeing people doing what the government was telling them to do without the need for the government. So that's an interesting development in how the virus is going to continue to evolve here in China, just around the corner, 2023. I personally feel that we all need to be responsible for our own health. We all need to, I continue to mask. I continue to distance myself and request people not to be too close to me. I mean, when I'm in open spaces and people that I don't know. And I continue to test whenever I going to go to another place. There's an interesting thing that I was mentioning in a short video that I put a couple of days ago, was that up until before I came to Zhongshan, which is like 2 days ago, there were places that were requiring 48-hour testing. Some were requiring 24, some were requiring none at all. And that created some confusion because, well, you don't know what the mandate, the general mandate is going to be. In the past, you knew what you needed to have, and now you didn't. But apparently, you've seen pictures. I've seen pictures of people just ripping the QR codes and ripping the scanning thing because tests are not required anymore, even in big cities as transportation. There are some instances where there are.
Train stations still have it,
Yeah.
but the airports don't. It's going to change in a couple of days, probably tonight or tomorrow. There'll be an announcement saying trains don't need it anymore. But right now, many airports in China have already announced. I haven't seen all of them, of course, but I've seen Beijing, two Beijing airports, Shanghai airports, Guangzhou airport. They're all saying you no longer need to have a 48-hour, but all you do need is a green code. You do need to have a green code, but it's even not checked when you go into the airport. So that's changed now. The trains still haven't made an announcement. That doesn't mean it isn't happening, but I haven't seen the announcement. That's what I mean. And I think what was interesting, yesterday we went to a shopping center together. We didn't need to scan to go in. That's the first time that's happened to me in months. Many months, maybe a couple of years, actually. We just walked straight into the shopping center, had a wander around. We wore masks, as everybody was inside the shopping center. Outside the shopping center is not so important, but we were wearing them anyway. We drove to the shopping center without masks in the car, of course. Then you put the mask on when you get out of the car, walk into the shopping center, no problem. And last night we went for dinner. And what was really interesting, we went out to dinner at a restaurant which I've never seen half full. Even during the COVID period, it was full. Last night it was half empty, right?
Reason for that, absolutely delicious food. But people are cautious. People
cautious,
are a bit wary of, okay, what is this new wave going to be like? Is it going to be, is it going to get out of control, or are people going to be able to mitigate the spread of the virus by taking care of their
themselves.
own?
Let me ask you a question now. What do you think about the change in the spin from CGTN, CCTV, all of the Chinese media are now saying COVID is not as bad as we thought it was. All the researchers saying that it's actually it's not like flu, it's different to flu, but it is going to have the same impact as flu. They seem to have, in my opinion anyway, they seem to have changed and shifted their narrative from we really need to care about COVID to it's not so important. What do you think about that?
The optics of that are going to be hammered by Western media, of course. But the truth of the matter is that the scientists had already realized that the three factors had been met, as you mentioned earlier. Number one, that the rate of elderly that had been vaccinated had increased to a level that made it manageable. And if the cases increase and people got sick, it wouldn't really affect too much the health system, the hospitals and whatnot. So that was a very important one. The second one was therapeutics, as you mentioned, the treatments that are available. And the third one was, well, they realized that the virulence of the virus isn't as bad. So there's truth in that. I mean, they found out, scientists and the government, that these three things had met, and it was possible to start easing up restrictions. What happens is that the government is not all that good at sending the message out to the people. I was discussing this with one of our friends, Daniel Dumbrell, saying that people listen to the government, but the government doesn't send the messages as clearly as it could be, because the 20 guidelines came into effect before the actual justified protests, as I like to call them. So things were changing, but it was no communication out there. There was no coverage by Western media about those changes that had already started. One of the main one was the second contact was not going to be asked to quarantine. That happened before the protest. That happened before any of these things that has been kidnapped by Western media to attack China.
That's true, but we also know for a fact some people were forced, even though the restrictions said that they don't need second contacts, close contacts don't need to quarantine. It did happen. So there was some implementation issues with this. And that's where the protests, I think, were justified. People just didn't know what was happening. You know, the government saying we're going to ease the restrictions and then was clamping down further locally. So central government was sending out these 20 points, which were valid and were great. They were starting to ease things along the lines of what people wanted. But local government in different cities was doing things very differently. And Guangzhou did this. Guangzhou said, we're not going to lock down the city, and then proceeded to lock down every suburb except one, Tianhe. And it wasn't even Tianhe. It was most of Tianhe was locked down, but Zhujiang New Town was not locked down. So this is how they justified it locally when they really ought to have been doing something very different.
There was I think that what people need to understand about China is that there are local leaders that are a little bit afraid of making the wrong decisions. So the government says, here's the 20 guidelines, and this is how we're going to start to ease up things. But when that mandate gets down to the Baoan or to the security person out here at the gates, right? He's not too convinced about this. He doesn't know, but he doesn't want to make a mistake. So there's a little bit of overreaction or overzealous implementation of safety measures. And that's what created the lack of communication. And I said this in one of the videos that I did for Guangdong. I was telling them, when similar circumstances take place in different parts of the city and people start commenting or exchanging information on WeChat and say like, oh, my garden isn't locked down.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm not why are you?
Mine is, yeah.
So people are like, what the, so
what's going on?
People actually pinpointed at the local management, at the local people implementing these mandates, implementing this lockdown, so these rules that are not really in line with what Beijing is trying to tell us. So that actually took place, and that fed a lot of the unhappiness in the population that led to the justified protests. But again, as I said from the beginning of the video, the timeline is extremely important. You've got the Big 20, the CPC National People's Congress, then the 20 guidelines that's starting to be implemented. And then you had that less than ideal implementation of those guidelines by local leadership. And then you have the justified protest. And now we have, okay, fine, let's just speed this up. Let's further ease these restrictions. And now we are in these new 10 guidelines that basically smell like normalcy.
Smell like freedom. Just a correction there. It was the National Party Congress, not the People's Congress.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, they're very, very different things. And people outside there probably don't. I know that yours was a slip of the tongue. You do know the difference. The National Party Congress is where the Communist Party gets together to decide policy. The People's Congress is the government. The People's Congress is what happens in like a parliament. So the Party Congress would be like the party meetings for whichever government party you support, the Republicans, Democrats, Tories, Labour, whatever it happens to be. So the party is one thing, even though there's not a second, well, there are other parties, but it was the party conference. Now, what's the difference between us and the rest of the world? We're getting, and it's already happening, I've seen this a few times on Twitter, they're looking forward. These people are looking forward to 1 million deaths. They want it to happen. And it will be the CCP's fault when this happens. Now, what's the difference between China and the West? One is culture. The Chinese communal culture will not allow this to happen. When people get sick, they won't go out. Or if they do go out, they're going to go out in such a way that they're not going to go out and infect the rest of the community. More than 90% of Chinese people would view themselves that way. If I'm sick, I'm staying home. I'll get the doctor. I'll get things sorted out. That's one thing. The other thing is the therapeutics. In the West, I don't think they're touching traditional Chinese medicine. And it does work here. People are using them all the time. So when they get sick, they're getting sick. They're taking the appropriate medicine, and medicines, that was one of the issues. They used to have a restriction where you couldn't go and buy fever medicine or painkiller medicine in the pharmacy, you had to go through the hospital and get a COVID check.
They were afraid that people were trying to hide
yes,
symptoms
yeah.
by getting these
And
medicines.
so what they did was they made it all free in the hospital.
Mhm.
You couldn't buy it in the pharmacy. It was free in the hospital. And so that was a better way of doing things. So that's been relieved now. That's gone. That instruction has now gone. And if you've got a headache, if you've got a fever, you can buy the appropriate medicine. And you don't need a prescription to do that. We never did in China. They just changed. I think there was 27 medicines that were restricted. Now they're unrestricted and you can just go and buy them. You can actually buy penicillin across the counter here, things like that. So that's changed. The other thing that has really changed is that the vaccines now, there is an inhaling vaccine, which was only introduced, it was formalized and approved back in September, but it was introduced into use in Guangzhou yesterday. That's as recent as yesterday. So that's allowing older people who have blood pressure conditions. The only restriction, they say, don't take it if you have lung problems. Don't take it if you are pregnant. And there's a couple of other restrictions.
But I don't know many elderly that are pregnant.
No, that's right. But a lot of them do have lung problems. But effectively what that's doing is allowing people who don't want to take an injection to say, well, I can get vaccinated now.
So it's making available resources for people that were either because of tradition opposed to this kind of protection, or because of health reasons, not vaccinating themselves. That was always a conundrum for the government. When you think about it, there's more than 100 million that are in that category. I think some people put it at 150 million people that were at risk if they were not protected. So now with this new medicine and alternative for them, reduces that number considerably and allows us to, breathe that freedom of travel. I wanted to ask you the question back. What's your take on that spin that we've heard from media? Because I think they're trying to skip the process.
They've missed the stage. Yeah. I think what they're doing is they're running and not walking. It really needed to happen a little slower than this. It does appear, to all intents and purposes, it appears that Omicron is not as serious as Delta. The problem with Omicron is that it is much more virulent. That means it's much easier to catch. It may not be as dangerous, but it is much easier to catch. And so if 25 times more people are getting it, that's the problem. It may be 10 times less dangerous to us, but 20 times more people are catching it. And that is why the American situation, and Australia the same. Australian death rate is going up again. These are happening because more people are getting sick. And there's another one that they say, even the vaccinated people more people are dying with vaccinations than without. Yeah, that's possibly true. Vaccinations don't stop death. They reduce death. They don't stop serious illness. They reduce serious illness. They don't stop you from catching any of these viruses, any of the variants of them. So at the moment, in places like Australia, where they have a 90+% of vaccinated people, then it's inevitable that more people who catch this disease will be vaccinated, because it's never been, apart from a few things, I think it was Fauci and a couple of other people said, if you get vaccinated, you won't get the virus. That was wrong. That was pure misinformation. I don't know how doctors ever said that, because it's been clear from the beginning, certainly in China, that getting vaccinated will not stop you catching COVID. It will reduce the risks of serious and critical and death COVID.
There's another aspect that it's important to keep an eye on, is the effect that this is going to have on the economy. When the 20 guidelines jumped in and we saw, for example, Guangzhou lifting restrictions, there was a clear uptick in the stock market. Now, it's important to keep an eye on what's going to take place now that this new, it was December 5th that went announced, right? This new 10 guidelines that make it just very easy for people to keep on working and travel and moving around, and even people coming back to China to do trade and do business. I was watching Cyrus Jansen yesterday on Twitter announcing that once again, the amount of trade between America and China is going to hit its highest record. It's is historic. So even after all the issues and all the restrictions and all the bad vibes between one country and the other, they're still going at it in trade. So
Australia's the same.
it's going to be even better now that people can come and continue trading and doing business. Sorry.
UK is the same. Australia is the same. In the case of the UK, China is their number 2 trading partner, with the EU as number 1. In the case of Australia, China is their number 1 supplier and their number 1 customer. In the case of the US, I think still is China is number 1. The fact is, trade hasn't stopped. What has stopped is, I feel very, very sorry for people who have jobs in the hospitality, retail. Retail didn't stop in China. What it did was went online. So a lot of online retailers have done very, very well out of the last couple of years. But the retail shops have suffered. Restaurants have suffered. Hotels have suffered. Anyone in the tourism industry, they have really, really suffered. And I think that's the economy that China wants to get back up and running. They don't care. I mean, of course, they care about the trade. The trade hasn't really been affected that much in a sense of, has any country reduced trade with China in the last 3 years? And the answer to that is, I don't think so.
No, there was probably a slight reduction in output at the beginning of the pandemic, because a lot of the industry, a lot of the productive, the means of production were shifted towards producing PPE, and that affected the production of other goods and services that people were not consuming because they were locked down and whatnot. So that happened at the beginning, but nowadays it's not that. That's not the case. Now, another thing that some people were talking about was all the dabai. All these people in hazmat suits and what are they going to do now? Because there were millions and millions and millions of people serving
many of them were volunteers
and serving Chinese people out there to get your to get your temperature taken, to get your tests, to get your codes. Now, millions of people are not needed anymore. So is that going to affect the economy of China? Well, you just said it. Most of these people were volunteers. So there you go. That's it. It's not going to have that big of an effect, but there's going to be a transition in which those people are going to go and reinsert themselves into.
It's going to be a difficult transition after 3 years of working pretty much full time, overtime every day, and many of them are volunteers. I personally know several of them who volunteered their time, and even some disabled friends have volunteered their time. They go there even in wheelchairs, and they're helping people to navigate the system, particularly older people who don't understand the smartphone QR code system. So they're helping people a lot. And those people are now going to be saying, well, what's next? What do I do now? And there is going to be an impact on that. There's a psychological impact when you've been as busy as heck for 3 years to suddenly not be busy. But in fact, in terms of the mass testing, that's really only been the last year. Less than a year. The mass testing, the mass lockdowns. We had lockdowns in 2020, but last year, 2021, myself and my wife went on a 7-week bike ride through 3 different provinces. No problems at all. It was this year that we decided we're not going to risk it this year. There are problems this year, and it was the dawning of Omicron.
And on topics that we wanted to talk, perhaps unrelated to COVID, is, well, I guess we need to talk about it. Xi Jinping going to Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, we can touch on that. I liked his arrival with the cavalcade of horses. It looked fantastic. I think it's a new world order, to be honest. I think we're setting the scene for a very interesting future, because the way that he was greeted there was entirely different to the way Joe Biden was greeted there.
Fist bump.
It really was. I mean, it looks like the Saudi Arabians are not really that interested in doing business with the Americans. They are interested in doing business with China. They're looking at using the RMB, which will be good. There'll be, I think, and I saw something today, a British MP, Lord Davidson, has made the comment that many countries are now stockpiling reserves of RMB. That's a very, very interesting take when a British MP is speaking like that, because I think that's a change around. If countries are making reserves of RMB, and less reserves of USD,
They see something coming.
something is happening.
The other thing that I wanted to mention was, in my personal opinion, I cannot I cannot put this any more clear. The Saudi Arabians have policies and values that I don't necessarily share. So when China is getting closer to Saudi Arabia, I'm not a big fan, but it is going to be an important part of this new world order that is taking place. Now, some people were asking why not settle this trade between Saudi Arabia and China in their own currency? Why in renminbi? Well, because Saudi Arabia can buy goods and products from China using that renminbi. There isn't much need for China to stock up on Saudi Arabia's currency.
I don't even know what Saudi Arabia's currency is. Is it reals or something like that? I don't know. Never really thought about that.
Big deals taking place, big things taking place diplomatically. Anthony Blinken will be coming to China as well.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting. I hope he gets to see it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, seriously, he'll fly into Beijing, he'll go for meetings, and then fly out again. If that's what happens, that's a disappointment. I hope he gets to spend some time and travel around China, jump on the fast trains, go to Xi'an, see go to Shenzhen. I mean, really, if he thinks that China has any degree of backwardness, he will find that quickly corrected.
He can't play ignorant. I mean, come on, these are people that have the best intelligence in the world, that they can see and they know exactly what China is like. It's just that the rhetoric needs to be a certain type of message. But that is going to be an interesting thing to keep an eye on. What's going to take place when they meet and discuss the moving forward. Perhaps, as some people were saying, America asking for help once more, as they did in 2008.
It's very likely.
Because if there is a shift away from the petrodollar, from the US dollar in world trade, they're going to be in a lot of hurt. So perhaps they're coming here to try to smooth the situation.
I think the inevitability is that the world has changed. It's not changing. It has changed. It's continuing to change. It's dynamic. Remember that word, dynamic, changed by forces in action. The world has changed. And it's continuing to change, and it's not changing to the benefit of the US dollar. It's changing to the benefit of the rest of the world. Mm-hmm. And I think you're right. The US needs to offset that. And by having wars, all they're doing is creating more US dollars. They're not creating any stability. They're just creating instability and more need for US dollars and US equipment to fight those wars. What they really need to do is to take a look long-term into the future and say, well, what's the benefit of that? Because at the end of the day, we might win all those wars, but what have we got from that? We've got a lot of money, nothing else. They don't have a community. They don't have culture. They don't have anything else except money. If that's what they want, then maybe that's where they'll continue. If they want to rebuild a world that has people enjoying their life without wars, then they need to deal with China.
And another
question
thing,
is, what do they want?
Another thing that will probably take place is a change in rhetoric, because when you hear all those stories about the relationship between China and the United States, it's always negative, it's always attacks, it's always just bad things happening. But then you learn that trade is the highest it's been ever in history. Therefore, there's talk about bad things, but there's purchasing and there's business and there's a lot of trade. Now, this is probably true of many other countries. This is probably true of the UK. This is probably true of the EU. This is probably true in Australia. There's all this aggressive talk, but there's all this positive trade and positive relationship, commercial relationship that, well, now that the restrictions have been reduced even more, it's going to be back to everybody making money, everybody
we can still make money. Everybody can make money. There's no problem with that. I don't think China's going to say we don't want to make money. They do. They want to make money and they want to enrich their own people. But by doing so, they have no problem with mutual enrichment. And this is what's happening with the BRI. It's all over Africa. It's all over South America. It's all over Europe, different parts of Europe, but not necessarily the European Union. But the BRI is out there enriching Chinese people. That's how you get the largest middle class in the world. But at the same time, it's not raping and pillaging in order to enrich themselves. They are sharing mutually beneficial advancements
and development. That's what's taking place in Southeast Asia. That's what's taking place in Africa. That's what's taking place in Latin America. As we see, they're building some subways in Colombia. So that's actually Chinese companies doing work in Colombia to help develop my own country, which I'm very grateful for. Jerry, last thoughts.
Let's wait and see. Everybody they're spouting. Everybody's wrong. Everybody's wrong until they're proven right. That's probably the best way to look at it. And what I'm seeing, particularly on Twitter, we've gone from CCP is draconian to CCP are now murdering because they've opened up. The rhetoric, watch the rhetoric, watch what happens, and watch the people who have been angry for years about what China is doing within its own borders.
The lockdown, the quarantine, the testing, the tracing.
Now watch how angry they are about what China is doing within its own borders, which is different.
People are dying.
It's a simple case of whatever China does, we're going to be negative about it. Take a look, look at what that person said 6 months ago, and you read, they were negative 6 months ago, they're negative today, and they're negative for a completely different reason. They have now got what they wanted 6 months ago, so they can now be negative again about it for the future. The fact is, every single prediction any of these experts have ever made about China has proven to be wrong. Every single one of them has proven to be wrong. So don't pay attention to them. Respond to them on Twitter or whatever social media you use and say, well, didn't you say this 6 months ago? Oh, yeah, whatever their reason. They'll probably block you if you question them.
If you challenge their expertise. All right, friends.
We have to get going. I have an appointment this afternoon.
And I have a trip to continue around China in my RV. Are we there yet? We'll do it. All right, guys. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for watching this video. And as always, if you liked it, give it a thumbs up. And if you like the content of our channels, make sure you subscribe to them. And make sure to share this video and leave comments in the comment section down below. And
we will get back to all the comments. We didn't address any of the questions coming through today, and I apologize for that. We are a little pressed for time, but we'll get back to you.
All right. Okay, friends. Until we see you again, take it easy.
Bye
For now.